In this episode of Understanding Buyers, we are going to cover roles and responsibilities. What are they tasked with as a job? What do they manage? We're going to talk about 4 key areas that they manage. Trust me, they manage a lot more, but these 4 key areas are going to help you better understand what they do and how they do it. And it's also going to put yourself in a position to talk to them. Stick with us. Buyers have complex, high-stress jobs. Some of them are managing millions and millions of dollars, inventories, budgets, and goals. We're going to talk about 4 key areas that they manage and delve into how you can better understand them and what they do so that you can communicate better and put yourself in a better position to succeed with them. Those 4 areas are managing the shelf, managing the industry and category insights, managing inventory, and then managing suppliers. So let's start with managing the shelf. If you think of a buyer owning a spot on the shelf, if you go into the retailer and you're like, I belong in this shelf is 4 feet, it's 2 shelves, and there are 10 items on there. They're the ones that manage what goes on there. And they work with category managers, they work with suppliers, they work with everybody to figure out what the best thing is. But at the end of the day, they will build that shelf. It's called a modular. They will build a modular, and that will live and exist inside of the store. Without getting too deep, some stores have the same modular in all of their stores. Some have different ones. You could have, say Walmart has 3,500 stores. They could have 1,000 different modulars, right? So it's not a simple task of like, I'm putting these 10 items everywhere because yay. They have to think about things differently. But here's the one thing that you need to understand the most. If there are 10 items, their job is to build a modular that succeeds. And that modular comes with a lot of responsibilities. That's how they're going to set their goals, which they track to. They have budgets. They're going to be bringing inventory in. They have to pay for that inventory. They're going to be selling that inventory. They'll have margin requirements. Everything that is in that set, if you think of selling it, they manage the whole entire process. And that's a lot. And because it is limited, their decision-making has to be pretty accurate, and it has to be something that they value and trust is going to succeed. And that's where your job when you're sitting across the table is to build that validation and build that trust. We'll talk a little bit more about how they make decisions in the next one, but understand that they're responsible for that modular. And the biggest thing is if there are 10 items on there and they all cost $10 and they're making a 50 margin, right? So they're making $5 pop. If they take an item off that to put yours on, you have to show how it will produce better than what was in there. Sometimes there's actually a reason why it might not produce as much, and that's very nuanced, and we will get into all of that. But if you think about their shelf space, that's what they're trying to accomplish, right? And their goals aren't just set to always be better than they were before. So there are also 2 things that come into play. How is the category doing? If I'm in a category that's up 20%, most likely the expectation for me as a buyer is to be up 20% or more. I might be in a category that's down, right? It might be 20% down. And winning might look like only being 15% down, like you're outpacing the market. Another thing that they're going to look at is called share of market. That's how they're doing versus other competitors. If I work for competitor A and I am 50% of the market and there's a competitor B that's 50% of the market, then I want to steal share from them. I want to outpace their growth because if the category's flat and I grow 105%, there's likelihood that I'm taking away from a retailer B. So I might become 51% of the market. They might become 49% of the market. That's winning, right? So they're balancing all of these market competition items, but they're all doing it with a very limited amount of space. That's how they build their goals. That's how they get their budgets. That's how they set expectations for the oncoming year. And they will track against that. If they're behind, they will push harder. If they're ahead, they will keep pushing because there's nothing wrong with being ahead. But they understand that shelf and the nuances in the shelf. what's working, what's not working is very important to them. And that's where line reviews come in. And we'll have a whole separate thing on line reviews. Every year, they're going to manage that modular. They're going to take items off the shelf and put items on the shelf. They're going to see over the last year what was working and what's not working. So item A might be doing great. Don't touch it. Item B seems to be struggling or maybe it's doing really well in some markets, but it's not in others. Maybe we need to change its location, geography. They look at a ton of information. That also gets us to the second thing that they manage, which is the industry and the category insights. They need to be experts on what's happening inside of the market. They have to have a pulse of the industry. And so if you're in an industry that's up or down, right, what's new, what's growing, what are the competitive pricings, they have to understand all of those little nuances to be successful, right? And so if I'm sitting in an industry that is going from wired to wireless, do I want to be ahead of that? Do I want someone else to be ahead of that? How does my retailer play into that situation? Am I going to come out with something that's budget friendly? Am I going to come out with an expensive item? All those little things they have to be thinking about because it's a 1-for-1 typically, right? You might be in an industry that's growing really rapidly and maybe that buyer just gets a new shelf or added space because they're going to take away from a category that's not doing well. Well, that's a gold mine. Then you get a whole new thing to play with. You're still going to be responsible for making up that space, right? So they're looking at the shelf, they're managing that shelf, but they're managing the insights from all the data that's around them. Everything that's happening in the category, price points, what price points work, what don't. How's marketing pushing? What marketing's working? What marketing is not working, right? The third thing we're going to talk about is inventory. So this is huge and they spend a lot of time with their replenishment teams to make sure that there's inventory on the shelf. Out of stock. We'll probably have a whole conversation just about out of stocks. Out of stock is a buyer's nightmare. So if you ever walk into a store to go buy Brian's peanut butter and that shelf is empty, and there's no product to be found, that is an out of stock. And it's caused by a lot of different things. Maybe the manufacturer just didn't produce. So something had a plant and the plant had a problem and it couldn't produce and now they're behind. It could be that you're outpacing your sales. Like you had a forecast in the system that you were going to sell 1 unit per store per week, and all of a sudden you're selling 3, and the product is pulling off the shelf so fast that you've created a bubble that you don't have enough inventory to follow up behind. Whatever those issues are, their job is to work with demand planning, with their replenishment team, with forecasting to make sure that they mitigate it at all costs. And then when it does happen, because inevitably stuff happens, how do you fix it as soon as possible? Like that is why they work so hard. And that's where the pressure comes down. Seasonality. How do I build inventory up for Christmas? How do I build inventory up for hot dogs at July 4th? There are a lot of these nuances, right? They're managing the shelf, but they're looking at the industry. They're looking at the inventory. They're making sure that the shelf is full all the time. This gets us to the last thing that they manage, which is us, the suppliers. That's where we want to be. Our goal is to be sitting in the chair of a supplier. And at the end of the day, they manage those relationships and they push and pull and make decisions based off it. So if you think about it this way, every single item on that shelf has a supplier attached to it. You know, some suppliers might be half the market. They might be all 5 of the 10 items. The big boys do that. You might just be 1, right? So it just depends. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. So they are working hand in hand to manage that shelf with the supplier. A lot of times when it comes to the industry and category insights that we're talking about, people think that the buyer is spent 20 years being a category expert on pizza sauces. Typically, that's not the situation. A lot of time retailers will actually move their buyers around so they don't get too comfortable inside of one category, which means they lean on their suppliers to give them the information, to teach them a lot, right? To make those decisions. They will understand and have the pulse of the industry like we talked about and manage the industry based off of their relationship with the suppliers, right? So if you think about it that way, when you walk into a meeting, you need to be a category expert. You need to be someone that they believe understands the industry so well that they can learn from you, right? And so if you think about it that way, it changes the dynamics. inventory flow. They are working every day sometimes with big suppliers on how to make sure inventory is moving. And then when something does go wrong, they're going to push on that supplier and say, okay, we have this problem. When are we going to get well? It's a term that they use all the time. What's our get well date? Well, if we ship here, we move this product from A to B, we get it expedited, we can get there by October 13th and everything will be fine. All right, get well day is October 13th. Is there a way we push it up? And they'll push, that's their job, right? They will push on pricing. Right? Suppliers have to understand how they're competing on price with the competition that's on the shelf, both in that retailer and other retailers, right? So am I at the right price? Is there a way we can cut back? So there's a lot of different things that they're going to lean on the supplier. And if you know that, that means that your job is to arm your buyer to make their lives easier. Best in class. If you could be best in class, or you could just not be a problem supplier, you will put yourself in a situation that you will succeed 9 times out of 10. You can't control everything, right? You might have a bad day. Things happen. Plants shut down. Trucks don't get there on time. Things will always happen. The more you mitigate that, the more you stay ahead of it, the more that you realize that this buyer's job is to take care of and mitigate. Come to them with solutions. Don't come to them with problems, right? That's what they want from their suppliers. Those are just the 4 key areas that we're going to talk about. They manage the shelf first and foremost. What items are sitting on there? How do they do that? They do that with the help of their managing suppliers. The supplier also is going to help manage category and industry insights. And at the end of the day, they manage the flow of product to make sure that it is on the shelf when the customer comes to buy it. One caveat to that is there are some buyers that have other things that will help them make decisions, which we're going to get to in the next episode. Made in the USA, veteran or minority owned, sustainability. They might have some other areas that might not necessarily affect the sales coming off the shelf, but it's important to the retailer and thus it will be important to the buyer. They might have part of their goals set aside to say, hey, I'd like you to entertain putting made in the USA product on, or pushing your supplier to become more sustainable, maybe get some packaging out of the system, maybe get plastic out, maybe go to recycling, whatever it may be. Those to me are what called tiebreakers. If you do fit into one of those areas and you know it's important to your buyer specifically, then absolutely utilize that, right? At the end of the day, what we're going to talk about next is how they make decisions. And that's checking boxes. If I've got 100 things that help me make a decision, I'm going to start checking boxes. The more boxes you can check, the better chance you have of getting on shelf. Right. And that's the goal. The goal is to get on shelf. The buyer's the gatekeeper. We need to understand it. We need to start walking into stores, taking off our owner hat, taking off our customer hat, and putting the buyer hat on and looking at the shelf differently than we've ever looked at it before. If we can do that, our chances of success go up greatly, tremendously. I hope this was helpful. Stick with us. The next one, like we talked about, is all going to be about how they make decisions. Take care.